Good afternoon, everyone. We've had a bit of technical difficulty, and I think we're well on the way for our live streaming for our September the 5th Heritage Kitchener meeting. Welcome to all. And first of all, I would like to introduce and reintroduce to some of you and welcome back our Heritage Planner, Victoria Groom. Welcome. And I have a few other announcements that I think would be interesting to all of us. Upcoming events. First of all, Saturday, September 16th is the Doors Open Waterloo Region, and from 10 until 4 in the afternoon. And there are a variety of heritage buildings, ones that are designated, ones that are proposed, perhaps of interesting residences, industry, and those are all open to view for your view. And one that is very familiar to me and favored on my tour, and I'll probably be hosting at that site, is the Governor's House and Jail, which is 73 Queen Street North, 7377 Queen Street North. However, the Waterloo County Jail Garden has not been really featured in some 20 years of this event, and so we have it on display. The other event that I think is of interest to all of us, and it may not be available for you to visit or attend, however, just watch for this one. It's the 50th anniversary of National Trust for Canada, and that event is going to be October 26th to the 28th in Ottawa. And before National Trust for Canada, the organization was called Heritage Canada. So those are just a few pieces of information and events that you may want to keep on in your calendar. And now I would like to proceed with number 2 on the agenda, disclosure of pecuniary interest or any nature thereof. Does anyone have anything to declare? Seeing none, we'll continue on. And now we're going to go to discussion items. 4.1, Draft Heritage Impact Assessment, 628 New Dundee Road. And our Heritage Planner, Jessica Thera, will make a brief presentation. Hold your questions, committee members. Then we'll have, after this presentation, we'll have one from the applicant's representative and asking questions to the applicant or representative, and then we're back to staff. All right, Jessica, please proceed. Oh, yes, and please do speak into your mic today, straight head on, because the audio is not as clear as it could be for all of us to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the first item on the agenda is a draft heritage impact assessment for the property municipally addressed as 628 New Dundee Road. The subject property is currently listed as a non-designated property of cultural heritage value or interest on the Municipal Heritage Register, and it contains a farmhouse built circa 1848, an original barn built at the same time, and an outbuilding whose construction date is not known, but it is visible in an aerial photograph from 1945. So the first draft of this proposed development had included the demolition of all existing buildings on site, but city staff worked with the applicant prior to a formal submission to revise the plans and retain the farmhouse. This proposal now includes the relocation of the farmhouse approximately 50 meters to the southwest to facilitate the construction of 11 blocks of stacked townhomes, as well as amenity space and an internal road system. A new driveway off of the internal road will be constructed for access to the retained heritage building, and portions of the building not original to the home are proposed to be removed. The draft HIA concluded that the subject property meets 2 of the 9 criteria for designation, and it provided a number of recommendations for mitigation, including documentation, the creation of a conservation plan to ensure all work done to the building is consistent with heritage best practices, and retaining select materials from the barn to use for commemoration and interpretation purposes. Staff are in the process of reviewing the HIA and at this time request the committee's input and feedback, and the applicant's heritage consultant is available today to answer any questions. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. And now I would like to invite Vanessa Hicks from MHBC to come forward, and I suppose you may have a brief presentation, and following that, committee members may ask questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. My name is Vanessa Hicks. I'm a heritage planner from MHBC. Some of you may recognize me, but I do see a few new faces today. And I will be providing a brief presentation on our proposal. Today, no decisions are being made on this presentation or this proposal. We are just looking for your comments and feedback. So the property is at 628 New Dundee Road, which is at about the southern limit of the city of Kitchener, located north of New Dundee Road, indicated by the little red bubble and the dotted red line on the images in front of you. We've done some work on, we've done a comprehensive review of the history of the property, especially trying to determine how the property and how the context of the property has evolved over time. And you can see that even beginning in 1945, 2007, and 2020, the context of the subject lands has changed quite dramatically. Today, the subject lands are designated for development. They're designated mixed use. In fact, I think that the existing zoning is neighborhood commercial with special regulations to allow for residential development. So whereas the property was historically used for agricultural use, and as you can see by the diagram taken from the official plan, the yellow is low-density residential, so there's a combination here of low-density residential, agricultural, as well as other uses. And right now, the site-specific exemption allows for townhouses, duplex, multiple dwelling, street townhouse, and stacked towns will be, is what is being proposed for the subject lands. As Jessica noted, the subject lands are listed on the Heritage Register for whatever reason. The listing indicates that the reason for which the property was listed is for the farmhouse only. I think that was an agreement that was come to between the city and the landowner at that time. So we completed a comprehensive heritage impact assessment. We determined that the property meets 2 criteria under OREG 906. I'm sure all of you are familiar with what that means. It's a very modest example of a Gothic revival cottage. It's been changed over time, but there are some components of it that are still indicative of that particular style. There's also a 19th century bank barn, and it's directly associated with the theme of agriculture, which is only meets the criteria because it's identified as a theme specifically in the City of Kitchener's Cultural Heritage Cultural Heritage Landscape document. It's not a significant cultural heritage landscape and not a good candidate for landscape preservation, but the heritage attributes that we identified was the dwelling and the barn. So our proposal is to retain the existing dwelling, the original components of that dwelling, removing the contemporary additions to it. You can see in the photographs, you can see what I mean by contemporary. There's D and D there. Our clients are proposing to retain the dwelling and relocate it approximately 50 or so meters southwest and integrating it into the proposed development, which includes stacked townhouses, removal of the contemporary additions, as I said, and removal of the existing barn, but salvaging materials, components of the barn are planned to be retained by the current owner and used to build a new structure using those materials, and some materials will also be retained on site. So our conclusion is that the removal of the barn is technically an adverse impact because it includes the removal of heritage fabric. Relocation also includes a range of impacts, including adverse because you're removing it from its original foundation. And the relocation is a negligible impact because the existing exact location in situ is not significant. The relocation of the building and conservation will also include a range of beneficial impacts. Obviously, being conserved over the long term is a beneficial impact. And we have a number of recommendations in our report, ranging from documentation and salvage to interpretation, commemoration, and of course the requirement of a conservation plan to make sure the building is moved safely and appropriately. And our next steps is to come back to the Heritage Advisory Committee. Given that it's a listed property, we'll need permission or to at least submit notice, official notice for the removal of the remainder of the structures on that property. And we're currently working with city staff for the conservation plan and our mitigation and conservation recommendations. And we will also come back to you with more information regarding the short and medium-term works to be carried out through the construction phase and to make sure that there's long-term maintenance carried out over the property. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to help you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So I'm going to now go to the committee for questions. Councilor Michaud.
Thank you, Ms. Hovland. This is great presentation, and I'm happy to see they're going to salvage some of the historical attributes of this property. We're in a housing crisis, and we need to keep building. A lot of times, these pieces would just go. So I'm happy that this is getting moved. But my question is, you mentioned conservation and whatnot during the move. Who looks after this building? Who will maintain this building, keep it updated and whatnot with care after everything's built?
Through the chair, so the plan right now is to have the building relocated, and once it's at its final destination, it will be part of land dedicated to the owner through the condo declaration. And through that declaration and through our heritage conservation plan, there would be recommendations there for long-term conservation. So we would provide recommendations on anything from, how often you should, it's like a chart saying you should clean the gutters, twice a year. You should have a structural look at it maybe every 10 years. And we provide those so that ongoing, they would make sure that they provide decent maintenance for the property.
So could there be an opportunity, because it's heritage, could there be, and needs to be preserved, could there be an opportunity for the corporation to include it in the property, to use it, to utilize it as a clubhouse or some type of use, or does it just sit?
They are planning on using it for continued residential use right now. That's the plan.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Michaud. Any other questions? Any comments? Yes, or recommendations? Yes, Alona.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So I did have a question about the location in that area. So I think that the Rosewell Swamp, I think, is sort of in that same vicinity. Does the swampland that is in that area impact at all the ability to relocate that building?
I was on the property last summer around this time, and I didn't see a swamp in the area that they were planning on relocating the building or anywhere on that particular property. So to my knowledge, and I'm only a heritage planner, I'm not an expert on natural landscapes, but to my knowledge, there's no encumbrances or obstacles related to any swamps or natural features.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alona. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will proceed for questions of staff. So, Jessica, you're taking questions. Any comments or recommendations, things to advise staff on? Yes, Peter.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a quick comment regarding the developer for this project. I just want to say that this is a really good job that the developer has recognized that a heritage building is something of value, and then when it is restored and brought back to life, that is a value that adds in such a positive way to a new development. It makes it better than it is without it, and it's we don't always see that situation. And to see it working here with staff and the developer is very heartening. I think it's terrific.
Thank you, Peter. Very good observation. Any other questions, comments? I know this is jumping ahead in the process, but I'd just like to have it noted. I have gone through the assessment, and I note that we're sort of downplaying the trees that are on the property, or at least it appears to me that way. And the fact that there are these deciduous trees along the lane, and yes, they may have been planted 1940s, 50s, but this is part and parcel of a farm community, a farmstead, when trees were planted as windbreaks. And so in the future design of this house and where it sits, I would like to see that incorporated in that plan. The other concern of mine is, yes, it's a great idea to save it, and I'm pleased to hear that. What I would like to emphasize is how can we set it apart in its design in relationship to the new townhouses and that, so that it doesn't appear, yes, it's an old house, yes, it's there, but it's, you know, that it sets itself apart from the rest of the suburb that's about to come. And the last observation I have is, in this assessment, we talk about the person or the farmer who bought this and existed from 1848 on this property to 1916, or one family, and they were Irish. And in this area, we know that many of them are German and Mennonite, a few Scottish people, but Irish are it's very interesting. And perhaps it's associated with those who came along the Huron Road and went out to Wilmot Township, where you have the Pine Hill Cemetery with many, many Irish descendants in there. So I think we need to think about that if we're writing up a plaque. And although it seems like a modest farmhouse, let's be clear, most of these farmhouses were of wood, or they might have been log cabins, they might have been frame, but just think about it, a farmhouse, farmhouse Gothic design in brick that comes along from the 1840s and so on. It's pretty spectacular. So even though it seems modest, it's not the Italianate, and it's not Victoria. Well, I guess it could be. But anyway, I think it's outstanding for a farmhouse Gothic in brick. And those are my comments. Any other? All right. So staff, are you satisfied with comments and so on? You have what you need. Thank you. We'll now proceed to item 4.2, which is the heritage permit application for 30-40 Margaret Avenue, new building, townhouse development. And Jessica Vera, our heritage planner, will now give us a overview of the presentation to follow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this application is for the property municipally addressed as 30 to 40 Margaret Avenue, which is a currently vacant lot designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located within the Civic Centre Neighbourhood Heritage Conservation District. This specific proposed development was first introduced to the committee in February of this year when an HIA was presented. That HIA has since been revised based on the comments provided by both the committee members and city staff. So the application is proposing the construction of a new townhome development, which will include 8 townhome blocks in addition to an internal roadway, surface visitor parking, and an amenity space. 4 of the townhome blocks will front onto Margaret Avenue, while the other 4 are located in the rear and front onto the internal roadway. The structures are 3 stories in height, and while contemporary in design, they do incorporate a number of traditional elements, including transoms and side lights at the entrances, and windows with mullions. The proposed materials include brick, wood, and copper. In reviewing this application, staff would like to note that they are generally in agreement with the findings and conclusions of the updated HIA, and that the proposed development is generally in compliance with the policies of the HCD plan. The proposed use, building height, massing, materials, and colors are appropriate for the site and the context of the area. The architectural style is reflective of the era in which it is being developed while still incorporating some more traditional features, and consideration has been given to the precedent cases identified in the HCD plan. Like these preferred examples, the proposed buildings establish a pedestrian-oriented street edge, are sensitive in scale and massing, and they have comparable fenestration. Further, per the HIA, there is no anticipated negative impacts to adjacent properties as constituted by the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. That concludes my presentation, and the applicant is available for questions.
Thank you, Jessica. We do have a delegation here from the neighborhood, Donna Keel, so I will call you forward to make your 5-minute presentation on this matter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Can you make sure that you're speaking right into the mic? We're having difficulty hearing you.
I'm going to have to lean over.
Better.
Is that better? Thank you. I thought about that, but I wasn't sure. Thanks. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk about this property, and I'm in favor of the low height and the townhouse concept for the proposed site. It will keep the low-density residential character that is so essential to this neighborhood. There are also policies that are intended to help protect and preserve the heritage assets and the character in the area and keep it complementary to the compatible with the heritage features. The one thing I'm concerned about is the contemporary roof line of the townhomes being incompatible and the pitched roofs. I did submit something that some of you may have already received. I'm not sure if they're going to show it anything or not. Over 80% of the homes in this area have key attributes with a roof line that's pitched. So the flat box-like roof line proposed disrupts the harmony and the heritage character of the streetscape, and it would lessen elements that reflect the Berlin vernacular, such as sloped roof lines, would lessen the stark distraction of the contemporary style. There are numerous sections in the Heritage District Plan that have recommendations, and section 3.3.53 will have pronounced visibility with the potential to significantly enhance or detract from the overall character of the neighborhood, depending on the ultimate appearance of the development on the site. I respectfully ask and request the city to work further with Activa Holdings to incorporate a sloped roof line more compatible with the heritage nature of the. In addition, I've included several references about being sympathetic to the original and mimic and match the styles that are there. Essential architecture and street character is important that the district may be maintained in the district. Residential roof shapes is also a recommendation designed so that they are complementary new builds, that is, are complementary to the surrounding buildings. There are specific guidelines as well for Margaret Avenue that it should establish a strong relationship with the street on the south side of the street, that it should incorporate a high degree of building articulation and articulation and architectural detail to the buildings across the street. And details are indicated that they could include varied roof lines in these recommendations and guidelines. For design policy, the proposed design is distinctive and unique to the Margaret Avenue area, but from my perspective, it isn't compatible with the existing buildings on the south side of the street. The design is a dramatic contrast from the other side, is disruptive and creating an unbalanced street view when you look at it from down the street. The angular plane analysis is confusing, at least to me, to understand that there are no rules or regulations specific. So the starting point of where you take the angular plane is a question for me. So were these drawings taken before or after the new multi-use trail was completed? The center line of the street has changed, and would this change impact the setback of the building and or the height of the building that's to be put in place, as it is higher somewhat on the front elevation along Margaret Avenue? I have some comments about mitigation measures, but it's primarily to do with Ellen Street West and the sloping downward topography at the rear of the property. And just a question about, I couldn't find a recommendation about protecting Ellen Street houses from water runoff, dust, and so on. And I couldn't find a mention about construction fencing either. For the green space, this is a huge part of the district plan, and it is much needed, the addition of the parkette, and so the recommendation to name that park in honor of the area is also admirable, and we appreciate the opportunity to have a parkette. Our particular neighborhood has only got 0.2% of park space for the whole neighborhood per person, when it should be closer to 10 square meters per person. So my questions on the green space are, will this green space be accessible to the residents in Civic Center or the public? Do the two entrances and access points reduce the size of the parkette? And does this mean that the city will own the land, or is it a privately owned public space? I asked the city to ensure this park space becomes accessible to the public. The Old Berlin town has the lowest amount of park provision, as I just mentioned, and we need park space. I urge Activa to commit to engaging residents, the neighborhood association, and other stakeholders to work together to build awareness, which would meet an HCC goal, to look at quality uses and to develop a placemaking strategy for the park. And trees, on the mature trees on Margaret Avenue, I have a question in regard to that. a canopy is a significant heritage character, and does the proposal sufficiently accommodate the replacement of the trees that are going to be removed? And there was a mention about a boulevard, but I wasn't able to discern if the boulevard mentioned in the documents was an interior boulevard or a street boulevard. The public realm aspect also talks a lot about trees.
Or a little bit,
Oh, my last point
all right,
is
thank
to
you.
do with street entrances and exits. I am not opposed to 2 exits for the property, but I do have serious concerns about safety and the traffic bottlenecks and impacts for children going to school. Accessing Margaret on the west end is in an unaligned intersection. There's traffic from Maynard Avenue that will cross at awkward angles. There's a curve on Margaret Avenue that also complicates things. The new build of 109 units at 64 Margaret will soon be spilling out at that same intersection. The width of Margaret Avenue is diminished, and a complication in the evening, of course, is Margaret Avenue traffic for the center and the square. I ask if the traffic study will be conducted. We need to eliminate future accidents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dottie Keel.
Thank you.
Questions for this delegation? Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming in today. I will now call on the representative for the development from MHBC Planning, Rachel Redshaw and Rachel Wolf.
All right, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Rachel Redshaw. I'm a senior heritage planner at MHBC. I'm here with Rachel Wolf, who's a senior planner at MHBC, and Andrew Fleck from Martin Simmons Swears, the architect on the project. I'm not sure, Jean, if you would like us to just go ahead and tackle some of those questions from the previous delegation. I will mention we didn't receive this prior to the meeting, so I'm going to do my best, or we're going to do our best to answer those questions. Thank you, Donna, for providing that to us. So the first comment I see was in regards to the roof line. And this is something that we looked at quite a bit. And the platform roof line was really taking inspiration from the adjacent church, the Church of the Good Shepherd. And Andrew might, after I complete the answers, Andrew might come in and jump in on that as well. So we did look at different roof lines, but we were trying to be legible while being sympathetic, and so that's what we've come up with. So there were, for example, we included iron sort of fence lines, so it reflects the iron fence, which is designated one of the attributes of the Church of the Good Shepherd, and those type of attributes to embellish that design. And I'll move on to the next question, but Andrew, I'm sure, can come in afterwards and maybe talk about that a little bit further. And again, so staff and MHBC, so we've completed the HIA and staff reviewed it, and so of course we go into depth in the analysis of these policies and guidelines that Donna mentioned, and as Jessica mentioned as well, the project meets the majority of these policies and guidelines in terms of design and material and architectural elements. The angular plane, now we did provide this, and just to backtrack, but in 2019, the previous proposal was 6 stories and 234 units, so quite larger. So we do have the townhouses, which makes it a little bit more articulated, and it's certainly smaller in height. So we have provided this, but it does meet the angular plane, and we have provided this above and beyond what is required. In terms of the Ellen Street properties, we do look at those properties as well in terms of distance. for vibration and drainage and those other issues that she's spoken about. So we do take a technical approach to that. The previous proposal did have a zone of influence study done on it, and that's for a two-level underground parking garage. So you can imagine we're actually building these on slab. So certainly significantly less vibration. So in terms of vibrations, there's a significant distance between those buildings. And in terms of drainage, those type of things typically are dealt with, whether it's a heritage property or not. They have to meet that, have an adequate plan for that sort of thing. And the distance is certainly, so I think we're about 20 meters is I think the smallest or the closest distance between the proposed development and one of the properties on Ellen Street. In terms of the parkettes, we did look at using a name from a historic landowner in that area. So you know that there were several mansions that were on that property at one point. So we do have a list of names to use for the parkette. Open landscape, so at this point, the proposal was to sort of combine parquet and artistic, not installations, but an artistic vibe to that as well. But I'll let Rachel Wolf speak more to that. And in terms of the treed boulevard, we are still proposing a treed boulevard. We have very small frontage that we have to deal with, but we are still proposing a treed boulevard at this point. So I'm just going to pass it on to my colleague, so Andrew, so if maybe he can speak a little bit more in terms of the roof line, and then maybe to Rachel Wolf to talk a little bit more about the landscape and the parquet.
Thank you. And would you say your name, please?
Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm from Martin Simmons Swears Architects. We're architects on the project. And through the chair, I'd like to thank the delegate for coming today. We appreciate having these conversations with the community. Regarding the roof line that was termed to be contemporary, the first thing we did when we started looking at this site and the townhouses was to do a review of what Victorian townhomes looked like. And across North America, quite a few Victorian townhomes, as opposed to Victorian homes, had a flat roof line. So that was not uncommon in the Victorian era. And secondly, this flat roof line allowed us to bring the stair up to the roof to provide the residents a rooftop terrace. So one of the great things about this neighborhood is it's a very active and vibrant community with eyes on the street, and you'll notice that the Victorian homes have multiple areas of terraces, both at the ground floor and second, and sometimes even the third floor, which animates the facade and brings life to all levels of the building. Now, these blocks that are facing Margaret, they don't have a rear yard because that's where the laneway is. So it was very important to us that we provide multiple opportunities for these residents to enjoy the outdoors of this neighborhood and to stitch the blocks into the neighborhood and how the neighborhood is already operating. So that was one of the great things that we noticed, that when we were doing a flat roof line, we were allowed to bring the stair up and provide a nice large roof terrace. So, regarding the high degree of articulation, the elevation that was shown in Jessica's presentation doesn't do justice to the push and pull that we're providing. So there is quite a rhythm to these townhouse blocks. And there is, we've used the materials to emphasize the push and pull along the facade. And because of the because of the stair volume that goes up to the roof, it does create like an up and down along the street. So it's not just a straight flat roof. that you might see right across the street. There's an apartment building that's 4 stories, and it's a very linear roof line, whereas our roof line, it goes up and down and goes in and out. And although the lines are perpendicular, it is not what I would consider to be a monolithic roof line. There's a lot of push and pull, and again, there is the added metal guard, which will be similar to the Church of the Good Shepherd fencing next door. So all in all, I think it is a well-conceived roof line that works well with the massing and stitches well into the neighborhood. Thank you.
Before Andrew leaves, are there any questions of Andrew from the committee members?
Thank you.
And now we have...
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Wolf from MHBC Planning. And
could you please really speak into the mic?
Absolutely. I'm Rachel Wolf from MHBC Planning, and as my colleague had noted, I'm going to speak to some of the boulevard planting that we are proposing with this development. So there's some enhanced boulevard planting that will be within the public right-of-way that will enter into the development. The canopy, as noted, is very significant, and we are proposing to replace that with street trees. There is a hydro line there, so they have to be a little bit smaller in stature to avoid that hydro line, but other than that, we are definitely proposing to be able to preserve as many trees as possible. Or sorry, not preserve, but to replace those trees and keep the canopy. And then with the park design, it is proposed that the park will become part of the city and go into city ownership. And we've had discussions with the Parks Department as well as with Heritage on how that design will work. And we're definitely open to further conversations and making sure that it's really working with the community and everything like that. That's all.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions? All right. Are there any other members of the MHBC Planning or the consortium who wish to say something or present? Thank you very much. And now I would just like to draw your attention to the email that was sent from a neighbor in the area, Sharon Weigel Clayton, concerning her regard for the townhouse style and what is to go on there. And I'm assuming everyone got this email, right? Yes, thank you. And now I wonder, would you wish to, members, comment on this? Any further questions to staff? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, it's actually a question to the developer, or to the Activa representatives. I know one of the things that was brought up by the delegation was the importance of working with the community as the project advances. Can you just give us a better understanding of what that will look like, please?
Certainly. So to my understanding, there has been several meetings that, especially with the Church of the Good Shepherd and the adjacent homeowners, that Activa has been involved with and meeting with them to really inform them of kind of what's going on, get feedback and things like that. And as through the site plan approval process and through the variances that we've gone through in the last couple of months, We've definitely received a lot of comments and feedback from the community, and we've tried to incorporate those as much as possible.
Thank you. Ilona, you have comments and...
Yes, I do have comments. So to the last person that just spoke, were you referring to the parkette or the development itself?
To the development itself.
Okay.
Because the city is going to be the owner of the park, we've been in discussions with city staff to work on that concept and developing it. Our understanding is that we would like the city to probably kind of spearhead any engagement with the community on that, as it'll be their asset.
So I can tell you that as someone who lives on Margaret Avenue, probably diagonally across from where the development is going in, I have not been involved in any of the consultations that have been done with the community. So I was not invited, nor was I aware of these consultations. So who was included?
To my understanding, I know that there has been meetings with the Church of the Good Shepherd. I know that they were involved, and I do have... Alex Sumner from Activa is just going to come up to speak to this a little bit more.
I'm Alex Sumner, the Director of Design Services. So we had extensive meetings with the Allen Street residents, and we went through this process on the last application we made, so we got to know the community groups very well. And so there was a couple of distinct groups. The Allen Street properties have sort of separate issues than the people in Margaret Ave. And so I can't explain why you weren't included, but our CAO, Jeff McMurdo, spent considerable time meeting with community groups and representatives. I can't remember his last name. One individual's name was Hal, who was very outspoken and had a lot of input into this. So we tried to incorporate all those concerns into our design, as well as the park. We've had extensive conversations with the Parks Department. Although they will own the asset, we wanted to have some input onto the design and the programming of the park, so that it was more than just a tot lot, and that it would be something, although it's small in size, would be something for everybody within that community, because it serves our development as well. So, any other questions?
So I think that maybe the development previously that was being proposed may have had a lot of community consultation, but I think the most recent development, there was limited consultation involved. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
No, that's not true.
Was there community meetings held?
There wasn't public meetings like there was last time, but there was several.
Because there is a major impact on Margaret Avenue, not just Ellen, given that the traffic will empty out onto Margaret Avenue, and that the front of the building is visible to all of those on Margaret Avenue as well. So this is a major vacant lot currently in the district, and anything that is built there will have a major impact on the community, because it will either enhance or it will distract from the community. So in my opinion, what is being proposed here is a very contemporary, modern design, and it might be an interpretation of Victorian roof lines, but it is not appropriate for our community. It is not representative of the features that were described in the Heritage District Plan that was actually approved by council and is considered to be policy and regulation that is supposed to be followed. So the interpretation that is provided here is a very loose interpretation.
Although your staff supports it.
Again, it is a very loose interpretation.
Right. So we did compromise what we had proposed to address your staff's requests and the community. And I think we went above the call of duty on public consultation, more than was required.
So I had actually prepared a bit of a presentation. I don't know if this is a good time to be going through it or not.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for coming forward and answering our questions. Are there any, yes, Councillor Michaud.
Sorry, I have a question for the, I'm sorry, can you come back?
Sorry, we didn't get this first.
I'm not sure if this is the place to be asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So with what everybody's looking at to bring in the designs and to incorporate as best you can within the community, where does the cost lie to do something like this? Like, is cost a factor when you do designs?
Yeah, like, we're here to make a profit, yeah.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's all I have. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Elona, you wish to present or
Yes, I
ask
did present,
a question?
I did prepare some slides that I would like to present. So I've kind of covered off the first few. So if we go to the fourth slide, it kind of outlines what is considered to be from the Community District Heritage Plan.
Elona, are you talking about following on this sheet?
Yes,
with you?
so the fourth,
All right.
the fourth point, the fourth
So
slide.
the fourth box on this handout, which was prepared, and I'm assuming the clerk has provided a copy of it for everyone. And we apologize it didn't get into your email box prior to 2 o'clock today. So, number 4 on the, within the boxes on page 1.
So when it talks about street-level architecture for any new development for Margaret Avenue, it specifically states that it should provide interest and compatibility with existing buildings across the street. It mentions various details that should be included or could be included, such as cornicers, pilasters, varied roof lines, pitched roof lines, gables and dormers, etc. I've also, on the next slide, provided examples, which were included already in other slides already seen, of compatible designs. What is considered to be preferred examples for this community? All of them have some sort of articulation, some sort of a roof design that is not flat. I already mentioned how this is a major development within our district, and things that are done in this spot will have a major pronounced visibility in the neighborhood. So whatever is put in here, we need to get it right. On the next slide, I've provided an example of recent townhouses that have gone into our community. So 28 Erin Street East, you can see the varied roof lines, the pitched roofs, the window details, and the bay. So this is, again, a more modern interpretation of what is suitable for our neighborhood. But this type of a roof line, this type of articulation, fits in with the neighborhood. The next one is at 29 Mansion, another recent townhouse build. Again, it has the articulated roof, or the roof line that is varied. It suits the neighborhood. It suits the character of the neighborhood. They've even tried to interpret turrets in a modern way. And there's interesting visual detail. And lastly, the example that I provided is 64 Margaret Avenue. So this one is the most recent build that is going in. In the AHA, it actually states, or HIA, it states that this is a vacant lot. It is now being built upon. This particular design was, the architect used elements of the previous mansion that was built there, the William H. Breithaupt mansion, that was demolished in 2003. And the inspiration for this design came from that particular mansion, and they've included different elements of that. And it's a beautiful, it just suits the street so beautifully. In the revised HIA from the applicant, it refers to the church, and on the next slide I've included a picture of the church itself. And the church doesn't just have the parapet or the tower that is there. It has a pitched roof as well, so it's much more than just the individual tower, which is used as inspiration for the design of these townhouses. It also references Appendix D, and in Appendix D, if you look a little bit deeper into that, it talks about the street, or the house across the street at 31 Margaret Avenue. And this is a Victorian-style home, and it tries to justify the design that is being built and indicate that it is emulating the house that, the Victorian-style house. I do not see the resemblance here at all. I think this is truly a stretch of the imagination to suggest that these two are even similar. I took a picture of that house across the street this morning, and you can see that there is no resemblance whatsoever. There is no, other than the front porch, there is no flat roof on that house. There is the widow's walk on the top, but that is not what is being emulated here in the design that's being proposed. And if you take a look at the next slide, which shows the streetscape, it shows the left side as to what is there currently, and then on the right side, what is being proposed, which is extremely different. The designs do not fit into this neighborhood. So in looking at the design, the way that it's being proposed right now, it is reflective of the current time, and it does not incorporate the key architectural styles or features of this heritage neighborhood. The modern design lacks the visual consistency of the streetscape that we have. And I think that the way that the proposed development has been rationalized in the HIA, it only talks about the guidelines that are being met. It doesn't talk about what is being omitted, what is not being addressed that is included in the Heritage District Plan. It only justifies the contemporary design based on components of the plan that it is meeting, but it doesn't talk about aspects that it's not meeting. So from my perspective, I strongly disagree that the adverse impact of the proposed development is just limited to the removal of 2 trees. I think this will impact the fabric of our neighborhood, and it is inconsistent with what we have. Given that we are starting out from scratch here, there is no reason why we cannot have something that is much more suitable for this community. As members of this community, if we want to make a change to our homes, we have to make an application. Any kind of change in structure or the facade, we have to go through the Heritage Committee, and it is it's a process to go through, and then you risk being having your application rejected because it doesn't meet the Heritage Plan. But yet the developer can come forward with a modern design that is not suitable here, and it is supported. And to me, that does not make sense. It is not in character with the community that we live in. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Alona. Are there any other comments you wish to share? Yes, Peter. Thank you, Alona.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment on this. It's a very interesting point that Ilona brings up, and it seems to me it's a question of, it centers around a question of style and historic style. And I believe that in order to design successfully within an historic context, that you have to master a whole bunch of items and not just the element of historic style. So, while, the repetition of historic elements that are in adjacent areas is a strategy for building in historic areas. It's only one component of it, and there are so many other ones. The relationships of the building to the street, the way that the geometry is broken down, the history of the building form, the materiality of it. And I got to say that from my impression of this project is that you've done a really good job on addressing all of these items that are not the sort of most immediate things which say to us this is an historic building or an historic context. So yeah, it's a contemporary building in an historic neighborhood, but it does respect the rules of the neighborhood in a very comprehensive way. It addresses the streetscape very well. The materiality is well done. The proportions are consistent with the buildings that are around it. The streetscape, it completes the missing half of Margaret Street that has been gone for 50, 60 years, and it does it in a compatible way. So I just want to say, I don't have a problem with the fact that this is a contemporary building or a flat roof building. I think it fits in with the neighborhood, and I think you've done a really excellent job in doing what is a very difficult task, and you've made it look quite easy, quite elegant, and I appreciate there's a lot of so much work that goes behind it. So I support this.
Thank you, Peter. Any other comments? Yes, Natalie.
So while I do understand we're not trying to, emulate historic buildings with these new builds, and there's going to be a contemporary aspect of it. However, I do find some of those mentioned attributes that are heritage attributes, such as the brick and the wood and the copper, like a lot of homes can be found with those attributes, and I don't see them screaming like this is a historical, I guess, interpretation on like a modern twist of historical attributes, because my parents' house built in the 90s also has brick and wood included in it, but I think maybe a redesign of the roof line would, I guess, address more of those issues of the design, just because the materials are used, but the roof line seems to be very, very important to a lot of residents that maybe weren't consulted, and maybe a redesign would be, I guess, sufficient for the roof line, even if the other parts of the building are left intact. Maybe just addressing that would be enough.
Thank you, Natalie. Are there any other comments? Councillor Chapman, do you have a question?
No, I just wonder if we will have questions for staff, or were you coming to that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Questions of staff, if you wish, right now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was just wondering if staff could comment on the feedback that we're getting here, and would it make sense to maybe defer this and take it back to take into account and consider some of the like the roof line changes that are being suggested, and I don't know, the streetscape of the building, whatever the case may be, but so maybe you could comment on that.
Through you, Madam Chair. So we're hearing feedback. I don't think it's consistent. I think we're hearing both sides of the argument. So we will be asking for a vote of this committee on the recommendation. And I think depending on the vote of that, we might have to come back before, potentially if it's not unanimous, before council. But I would say that from our perspective, sitting here, I do see arguments on both sides, and some are saying that they like it the way it is, and others are asking for more change. So I don't think we're not getting consistent direction, and the way to give us direction is through a vote.
Okay, so I'm going to move a deferral. So that would, and the purpose of it would be to maybe come to a consensus with the community. And the committee members.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. We are at the time of recommending the staff report and so on, so deferral would come before recommending this. And Councillor Chapman, you wish to make a motion to defer, and as I understand, one would have to have a time and date for the deferral.
Again, I'll ask staff, would, a month till the next Heritage Committee meeting be sufficient, or should we look too much down the road?
Through you, Madam Chair, so this is the public process of part of the heritage permit application. We don't have tools for further engagement, and changes as a result of Bill 23 to the Planning Act have indicated that site plan is not a public process and it is delegated to staff. So community engagement, I heard a lot of good discussion about park design, and it's something that I'll bring back to our colleagues in Parks and Operations, how they could consider public feedback as part of a design build of that public amenity that will be dedicated to the city. But in terms of the debate on the design, we do rely on this committee to be representative of the community.
Councillor Chapman?
So you're saying no deferral, basically?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd want to understand the purpose of the deferral. I think based on your comments, you're suggesting that there be an opportunity for additional community engagement, and my position is the Planning Act is clear on site plan, and this meeting is the community engagement component of the heritage permit application process.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman, could you clarify this response for me?
I guess there's no room really for a deferral based on what we're hearing from the staff, so.
Okay, so you're making a motion to defer.
I retract the motion.
Sorry?
I retract the motion.
You retract the motion. It's been a long time since I've done this. I don't think there's ever been a time when we've deferred something at a heritage meeting, but anyway. So with that, any other comments? Oh, Councillor Michaud, you're taking down your hand. Okay. All right. So with that, I will now read the recommendation. I am sorry, I neglected to see on my left side here. Ilona.
Yes, I have another question for staff. So as part of the working with the developer, what changes were made to the HIA as a result of the last round of changes? What were the changes that were incorporated? Because I know that there was some additional work that was done in addressing the HIA to make it more amenable and incorporating the comments that were made at the last meeting where the HIA was presented. And at that meeting, we also addressed the roof line and the modern design. So was there further discussion with the developer in changing the proposal in the meantime, since the last time it came forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, there was discussion with the applicants as a result of the comments that we received. Further justification was provided in the HIA on why changes to the roof line specifically was not feasible. We've reached a compromise through changes to the fenestration, including incorporating more traditional style windows. So while this is a contemporary design, there are traditional elements that were incorporated in it after the comments received when the HIA was first brought forward.
And what was the rationale given for not being able to change the roof line?
Through you, Madam Chair, it was the same rationale that had been echoed by Andrew earlier in terms of providing amenity space, and there is also the fact that there is several of the preferred examples within the CC and HCD plan that depicts flat roof lines. Further, in terms of speaking to the shape of the roof line specifically, there is no requirement within the plan for a sloped roof line. There's suggestions on how to incorporate traditional elements, and that policy is met by incorporating traditional elements in other areas.
So while the interpretation might be to the letter of the law, it does not meet the spirit of what the district plan actually means, what the intent was for the neighborhood.
I don't think the spirit of the policies of the CCN HCD plan can be boiled down to just the roof line. I do believe that the policies are met in other regards.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I had
Yes.
a chance to quickly speak with the applicant, who's agreed that perhaps an offline meeting, one-on-one with yourself, Ilona, as the member of the district representative, that's probably the best course of action that we can take, so we can continue this discussion.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Ilona, and developer. All right, let us proceed then to the recommendation in the staff report that pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2023 V-015 be approved as outlined in Development Services Department Report DSD 2023-367. To permit the construction of 8 blocks of townhome dwellings, an amenity space, and internal roadway system with 2 access points onto Margaret Avenue on the property municipally addressed as 30-40 Margaret Avenue. In accordance with the plans and supplementary information submitted with the application and subject to the following condition. 1, that the final Heritage Impact Assessment and Cultural Heritage Protection Plan be submitted and approved by the Director of Planning prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. 2, that final samples of the building materials and colors be submitted for review by Heritage Planning staff in conjunction with urban design prior to the issuance of a building permit. And 3, that the final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by Heritage Planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. And so who would like to move that? Councillor Michaud. All right, we will now take a vote. So those who support it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 3. So it will proceed to council on September the 25th, 2023, as it did not get unanimous approval. All right, next one, 4.3. Scoped assessment, Heritage Impact Assessment, 417 King Street West, proposed 55-story tower. And Victoria Gruen, please present, and as I've said before, speak into the mic so we can hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Heritage Planning staff are in receipt of a draft Heritage Impact Assessment for the property municipally addressed as 417 King Street West. The HIA was requested as part of official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications. The subject property does not contain a cultural heritage resource, but is adjacent to the property municipally addressed as 404 to 410 King Street West, commonly referred to as the Kaufman Building, which is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The subject property is also in close proximity to the Lang Tannery Building, which is listed on the city's Municipal Heritage Register. And lastly, the subject property is located within the Warehouse District Cultural Heritage Landscape. The subject property is shown on the map on the screen highlighted in red, with the Kaufman Building to the north, and you can sort of see the Lang Tannery property to the south. The proposed development contemplates the demolition of the existing building at 417 King Street West in order to facilitate the construction of a 55-story mixed-use tower with 622 units. The proposed development includes a 6-story podium with amenity space on the podium roof. The lobby, main entrance, and retail uses will be oriented to King Street and Francis Street. The development will include both podium and underground parking with vehicular access oriented towards Halls Lane. The proposed tower will incorporate precast concrete, metal, and glass on the podium and glass on the tower to achieve a contemporary design. The draft HIA includes an impact assessment in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. The draft HIA concludes that the proposed development will have no adverse impacts on the adjacent designated property, the Kaufman Building, the nearby listed property, the Lang Tannery Building, or the Warehouse District Cultural Heritage Landscape. Heritage Planning staff are in the process of reviewing the draft HIA and at this time are requesting the committee's input and feedback to be taken into consideration. Staff would like to reiterate that the draft HIA was submitted as part of official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications. The design of the building and any special conditions will be addressed as part of the site plan stage once an application is received. Staff are only seeking comments at this time, and this development proposal will not come back before Heritage Kitchener as the subject lands do not contain a heritage resource. The applicant's heritage consultant is in attendance this evening to answer any questions from the committee regarding the heritage impact assessment. This concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And I would invite Jillian Smith and Dan Curie from the Planning Consortium to come forward and answer. I understand you're here to just answer questions. Could you lean into the mic?
Sorry, it will just be me this evening, Jillian Smith, and I do have a very brief presentation. So as I stated, my name is Jillian Smith. I'm a heritage planner with MHBC, and I'm here today to just talk about the HIA that we prepared for 417 King Street West. Is there a... Yeah, no worries. Thank you. So the property is located at 417 King Street West. It currently consists of a single-story brick commercial building, and it was formerly known as Ziggy's Cycle. The owner of the property is proposing to redevelop the site with a 55-story mixed-use tower. The property is within the cultural heritage landscape of the Warehouse District and is located near two heritage properties. And as such, the city required the completion of a heritage impact assessment to assess for adverse impacts on the surrounding resources. But the site itself does not have any heritage resources. So I don't know if I necessarily need to go over this. I think it's been made clear. But I will just briefly show you a map as to where these heritage resources are located. You have the Kaufman Building, which is directly across from the subject site. And then you have the another listed property located about a block behind the property, known as Lang Tanning Co., and that property is listed. And as we know, the property is within the CHL of the Warehouse District. As noted, it's a 55-story tower with a 6-story podium. There will be one level of underground parking. The remainder of the parking will be accommodated within the podium. There will be ground floor retail, and part of the retail will sort of consist of a patio that kind of blends into the existing parquet, Francis Green parquet, and then the podium will also contain amenity space. The podium is also proposed to be comprised of a mix of material, including brick, metal, and glass. In terms of the impact assessment, the proposed development will not result in adverse impacts to the surrounding heritage properties. We looked at shadows. The shadow study was completed, and we looked at shadows generated on the Kaufman Building. And while shadows will be cast, they will be very narrow. and they will not be present for a long period of time. And given that there are no natural heritage features and the shadows will not be present for more than a few hours, it will not alter or otherwise impact the attributes of the heritage property. We also looked at possible impacts to the Kaufman building resulting from construction activities, such as land disturbance. And so the Kaufman building was built as an industrial building, constructed of thick slab concrete and reinforced with steel. So it was really designed to withstand and tolerate large vibrations from industrial equipment. And as a result of the adaptive reuse of the building, the structure hasn't changed. So therefore, vibrations or other land use disturbances from construction are not likely to impact the building. In terms of impacts to the Warehouse District cultural heritage landscape, the landscape itself contains a range of land uses and building types. It's really informed by the original industrial and commercial buildings that remain today. And existing tower developments within the CHL have demonstrated that similar types of infill development can be successfully integrated into the CHL. There are no contextually significant buildings to be removed as part of this development. And based on the concept plan, there are no impacts that have been identified, and therefore no mitigation or recommendations are required to mitigate against any adverse impacts. So that kind of summarizes my brief presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jillian. And I will say I appreciated the clear map you had in your presentation, exactly designating the area of where it's supposed to happen. I appreciate that. Questions for Jillian, our delegation here? Yes, Natalie.
On the site plan, there is like a proposal for a park there. I am just wondering, the current art installations you can see on Figure 2 from the view of King Street and Francis Street, they have like a really cool art installation with gears, which really represents the industrial area. Is there any plans to move those, get rid of those, or are they going to be incorporated in the property?
No, so that park will remain as is. It will not be altered. I think maybe what you're looking at is just the existing park that is poorly rendered, or just the patio that they're proposing to sort of blend into the park.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other questions for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just wondering if you could describe to us what your vision of the Warehouse District Cultural Heritage Landscape Area is. Because you made reference to it, right? And say, well, it's a variety, pretty well you can have anything. So what do you think the intention of that designation was initially?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to say that it can house anything. I guess I just mean that it is really much, it's very much informed by the original industrial and commercial buildings and uses that were once there and that have remained there or adaptively reused. But that's not to say that there are not other forms of development there, such as residential or institutional. So I guess I'm just saying that you can still have those sort of original uses, but it's also sort of evolved over time to accommodate other uses as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Any other comments? Yes, Alona.
So I had a question about the shadow studies that you mentioned. So I can't imagine a 55-story building that is that wide not casting a bit of a shadow on the surrounding area. So I'm just wondering, and at different times of the year, it's going to have a different impact. The shadow length is going to be longer at different times of the year. So has there been any consideration given to not just the Kaufman building, but other neighborhoods in that area and the impact that will be from the shadows of the building?
Yeah, so looking at the shadow study, shadows will be cast this spring and the fall, in the late afternoon, and in the winter around 6 p.m. And that we looked at the Kaufman building because that was the designated property across the street. But the conclusions of looking at that sort of suggested that this building is casting very narrow shadows. They're not widespread, and they're kind of only present for short periods of time. As the sun moves across the sky, it kind of shifts around. So the same logic would still apply to surrounding properties, that this shadow that's being cast is not large and it's not existing for a long period of time, so the impact would be minimal.
Was consideration also given to the multiplicative effect of all the other higher buildings in that area and the shadows that would be casting on the neighborhood? Because there are many towers that are going up in that area, so some of these buildings, some of these older buildings might be in the shadows for a significant period of time during the day.
So the shadow study only considered the proposed development when looking at that shadow specifically. It didn't look at the other buildings.
Okay. Was there also consideration given to wind studies?
Not to my knowledge, there was no wind study.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alona. Thank you, Jillian.
Thanks.
Are there any other comments or directions to staff? Yes, Peter.
Thank you, and I understand that this is the only time that this building will be in front of the committee, so that's our opportunity to comment. Okay. The way I sort of perceive this building is in three parts. There's the tower, there's the story at grade, and then there's the middle podium. Let's take the separate sections. The tower itself, I don't have a problem with the tower. It's fairly straightforward. There's nothing incredibly remarkable nor anything that detracts from it very much. And the fact that it's set back from the street, it has less of an impact. I don't think there's any problem there. The retail at grade is exactly what's supposed to happen in these kind of buildings, that there's a sort of a continuous ground plane from the sidewalk into the retail spaces, it livens the street. It's set back into a colonnade like the other buildings along there. It's a very nice move. I think it's a nice ground plane. I do have a problem with the middle section of the building, because it's a 5-story parking garage. There's no residential units in it. There's nobody living in it. There's no people that occupy this on a regular basis. It's been it's been a lot of work that's gone on to make it look more attractive, right? It's got brick, it's got LED lights, it has windows that don't really have anybody looking out of them, but they give the suggestion that there's sort of people behind them. But still, it's an unoccupied 5-story parking garage on King Street in the downtown. And I think that's a bad idea. And I think it's a bad idea for 2 reasons. I think it's potentially unsafe and it's unfair. So the unsafe is, my hero, Jane Jacobs, used the phrase eyes in the street to describe what makes safe streets in cities. And what makes them safe, those streets that have strangers on them, is having people who are either living there or working there or being there, being able to observe what goes on at the level of the street. And that's what makes it safe, because people will behave better in the city when they know that other people can see them. And when they know that other people can't see them, that's when we have problems. So where are the eyes in the street for this building? They're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the 7th story up from the street before you get the first residential unit. Right? That's a long way away, and it's like no other street tower podium relationship that is anywhere else along the main street down the middle of King Street. So there are no eyes in the street from this building, right? Yeah, there could be from the retail, but the retail is not open all the time. So this 5-story parking garage, I think it is unfair to impose this on King Street, because that, as citizens, when it's all occupied and it's all done, that's what we get, a 5-story parking garage, right? And that's really not acceptable. The parking garage turns its back to the street, figuratively. And even though it's been very elaborately done, I don't think that it is appropriate in this context. So, can it be done differently, right? I think that we have examples of recent buildings, of towers and podium bases that have done a very good job of bringing residential closer to the street level and making a safer relationship to the street. Right next door, One Victoria, right? It does not have a, the corner of King and Victoria is not a parking garage, right? A couple doors over, 117 King, right? Facing onto King Street with like 6 stories of residential, and the parking is put in behind it. 60 Charles Street by the park, a really good example of, even though there is a parking garage that is at that podium level, there are residential units that have been integrated into it in such a way that it ameliorates it ameliorates the effect of the parking garage very well. But there's no effort for any of that kind of integration here. It's 5 stories of parking, and that's it. So I don't think this is appropriate for the, I got to be correct in this. This portion of the building is not appropriate, right? I have nothing against the tower, nothing against the density, I'm all for it. But the way that this building treats the street because of that podium needs some serious reconsideration. And I hope that as this goes before council, that can be looked at again, because I think it really needs, that portion of the building needs some rethought.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. Peter, I agree with you with regards to the 5-story parking garage on the street level, but I'm confused because I'm looking at a rendering and it looks like there's storefronts all along the bottom. Isn't that the case? So at grade level, there's storefronts, and then there's a piece where it's just parking garages, and it looks like it's enclosed parking garage, or is that going to be open? I don't even know. It's enclosed, so it's an enclosed building, and then you've got your high-rises with probably balconies and whatnot, right? So I see what you're saying about safety in the streets, but I think the fact that there's going to be retail and activity all around it, I don't see the, I mean, if it was just a parking garage and nothing else, absolutely.
Retail's only there a third of the day.
True, but I'm not sure that anybody would want to live that right low on the street anyways. You might have a, well, they are. Yeah, the older buildings.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
Mr. Couture. If you don't mind using your mic, please, so we can all hear you.
Oh, sorry, but they are, right? The examples that I gave, I believe, illustrates that the people don't have a problem with living that close to the street in that kind of density, right?
If I may interject,
Thanks.
what you're saying, Peter, is that this area in brown, that is the parking garage, right? Am I interpreting right?
Yes.
Right.
So in Figure 9, we see the retail at grade recessed with the colonnade, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories of parking garage. That then forms the podium level for the amenity, and then the next floor above that is where the residential floors start, on the 7th floor. And that's what I have the problem with.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Councillor Michaud. And I think it's very good to have this discussion because it gives us lots of food for thought. Any other questions, comments? I had an observation from the report, and it was said, as every one of these proposals come forward, we are going to make a landmark building. And indeed, with 55 stories, you're likely to make a landmark. However, I think from watching and reading the paper that there are going to be many 55 stories buildings. And I think this has been said before at this committee about the number of buildings that we're getting in glass and metal and concrete. And for me, I'm thinking the landmarks are already at the intersection of King and Victoria. We have the Kaufman Building, we have the School of Pharmacy with its decorative glass, and it seems to me that we should be looking a little bit more at some type of enhancement, and not, yes, I'm the tallest building on this block. However, I think we should not try to overpower the others that have come before us. And so I would hope that there would be, if this is the developer's wish here with the 5 stories of brown or whatever, I'm hoping that this area could be cheerier, have more enhancement, and those would be my comments. Are there any other comments to share with staff on this? All right, thank you. And staff, you have taken note of all these comments. All right, we're going to go on to 4.4, Heritage Permit Application, HPA 2023, 15 Church Street. Construction was 6-story affordable housing building. And Jessica, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the next application is for the subject property municipally addressed as 15 Church Street, located within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District and designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This property is a severed parcel from 137 and 149 Queen Street South, which contains the pictured buildings. 139 and 147 Queen Street South are both classified as Group A buildings, meaning that they have a high significance within the district. The application was first introduced to the committee in June of this year as the HIA was brought forward for review and comment. So the application is proposing the construction of a 6-story affordable housing development with 1 story of underground parking and a 2-way ramp for ingress and egress along Queen Street South, as well as some at-grade parking with access from Church Street. There are no proposed alterations to the heritage attributes of the site, which are the church and the house. In reviewing the merits of this application, staff would like to note that the proposed development is in compliance with the policies of the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District, being of an appropriate scale, located so as not to disrupt the existing streetscape, and within an area intended to accommodate development and greater density, as well as being contemporary in design but taking cues from the design of the rest of the district, making it distinguishable but compatible. Further, there are no adverse impacts anticipated to the subject property, to the adjacent properties, to the streetscape, or to the surrounding area as a result of the proposal. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Do we have Mr. Kaushal from McCallum Sather here? Sorry, I said Mr. Sorry about that. It's Kanika.
That's okay. That's okay. Yes, my name is Kanika, and I'm a senior heritage professional with McCallum Sather Architects. We're the consultants on file.
Do you have a presentation?
We don't today. Thank you.
Go ahead, please. Or do you wish questions?
Yeah, we're just here to answer questions as needed. Thank you.
Sorry about this.
No problem.
Thank you. So we're looking at 15 Church Street. I think we've had a very good overview of what was to come. Would we have any questions for Ms. Cowgill? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I've been contacted by residents at 20 St. George Street ever since this proposal came forward. And I was just wondering if any of their concerns have been received by you, and if any changes to the original proposal have been modified to address those concerns.
Thank you for the question. If it's okay, I would like Peter, who's our client, to address this. Thank you.
Sure. I'm Peter Maxwell from Maxwell Building Consultants. We work as the development consultant on the project. St. Paul's Historic Church did have substantial consultation with the community at St. Paul's. We actually met 4 different times. We collected suggestions and proposed changes. We actually completely redesigned the building to address as many of their concerns as possible. So things like overlook of windows, generally the landscape in between. Unfortunately, some of the requests were that the building did not get built at all, and that wasn't consistent with what we could address. But we did address as many of their concerns as possible, and we had follow-up feedback with that community.
So did you consult with the Sand Hills Retirement Home residents?
Yes, we did.
Oh, I thought you said you consulted with the church.
So we also had discussion with Benton Street Church, who was also a neighbor to the property. They did not have substantial concerns. Theirs were mostly around a retaining wall, but definitely substantial conversations with the Benton Street, or the Sand Hills, community.
And what's the setback? Because I think that was one of their biggest concerns, right?
Right.
What's the setback from your building, and like the distance between your building and their building?
Yeah, do you have the site plan handy? So there are jogs in the building. We increased the setback where there are windows or where there are residents, which would overlook their building.
So that is more than 5 meters?
Even
that would be, because this was 4.
Yep. The drawing that I have doesn't actually have the setback on it. The zoning setback is 1.5 meters, and I believe the minimum setback that we have is 6 meters.
From any balcony or window up on the
From the lot
Sand
line.
Hills?
From the lot line.
From the lot line?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Let me just say I'm really pleased to see affordable housing going in there, and I take it it's deeply affordable. It's affordable to, will it fall under the region to house people there through their supportive housing list? Or when we say affordable, maybe we should better clarify that.
Sure, I could clarify. So it is a mixed affordability building. It has both market rate units, median market rent units. So for a 1-bedroom, a median market rent unit in this area is $1,254 right now, but also deeply affordable units, which are set at the Ontario disability rate, which is currently $522.
And can you give us a breakdown as far as numbers of each of those?
Yeah, so basically half of the building, slightly less than half of the building, participated with the region. They have some capital funding through the region. So that is 22 units in total that apply, of which so it changed, but 9 of them are the deeply affordable 522 units. The remainder are the median market rent units.
So 11 medium, 9 deeply, and how many altogether? How many?
57 in total, yeah.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Any other questions for the delegate? Yes, Councillor Michaud.
So I just have a comment. Thanks for your presentation. I'm really happy to see the breakdown of affordable housing, and thanks for asking that, Councillor Chapman. It's nice to see developments like this downtown when you're that with clear, when you say affordability at some degree, you mean it, and that's nice to see, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michaud. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, then we have a recommendation from staff. And again, if unanimously approved, it will be dealt with by staff. Otherwise, it will go to council September 25th. So here's the recommendation. That pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HBA 2023 V-014 be approved as outlined in Development Services Department Report DSD 2023-360 to permit the construction of a 6-story affordable housing building at the property municipally addressed as 15 Church Street, in accordance with the plans and supplementary information submitted with the application and subject to the following conditions. That the final building permit drawings be reviewed and related to heritage clearance provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. All those in favor? Sorry, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a question of staff, since this is a staff report. I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier.
Yes, would you like to ask it now before?
Yeah, if I may, before the vote. Can we just change the recommendation to not say a 6-story affordable housing building, because it's the majority of the units are not affordable, they're market value. So I think if we could change that to a 6-story housing building with 9 affordable units or something. You can put a percentage, whatever you think is adequate, but it is not an affordable housing building.
Staff, question, comment?
Yeah, we're amenable to that change. If you'd like to make, you would have to do an amendment to the recommendation, but we would have no issue with that.
Okay, so I'd like to move that the wording of the recommendation be changed to the construction of a 6-story housing building with 9 affordable units.
Councillor Michaud.
Sorry, what does this have to do with heritage? Are we getting out of our lane here a bit? I'm just...
Well, it's a recommendation and report that we're voting on, so it should reflect what we actually have before us.
Madam Clerk.
Yes, through the chair, we would have to vote on the amendment first, and then if that is approved, then you vote on the general motion.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So all those in favor of the amended motion, or do we have to read it again? All right. All those in favor of the amended motion? Motion carried. Now, all those in favor of the recommendation as read?
The recommendation as amended.
I'm sorry.
The recommendation as amended.
As amended.
Yes.
Thank you. It's carried. I think there was one person who did not vote in favor, so this will have to wait till September 25th.
Are you sure? I think the vote was anonymous.
This goes back to council now?
I'm sorry. All right, shall we do this one again? All right, the amended motion, all those in favor? All right, now,
It is unanimous.
The motion.
Yeah.
All
it's
those in
unanimous.
favor of the motion?
You voted, so it's unanimous, and it can be processed under delegated approval authority.
Right, thank you. Lots of political activity. Thank you. All right, we're now on to the designation 3543 Sheldon Avenue North under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Jessica, please make your brief presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as noted, this is a notice of intention to designate for the property municipally addressed as 35 and 43 Sheldon Avenue North. These buildings are being recognized for their design and physical, historical, associative, and contextual values. Designations of the property was a condition of approval for a site plan application that was submitted to the city in 2020, with the accompanying HIA being brought before the committee in May of 2021. So in terms of their design value, the two buildings are representative examples of the Tudor Revival style, and they're in good condition with many intact elements. Further, they display a high degree of craftsmanship and artistic merit, with the symmetrical and complementary design of the buildings being a unique and notable feature. In terms of their historical value, they were originally owned by Barney Joseph and Irving Salmer, who were both prominent merchants within the city, and they were uncle and nephew, which is how the symmetrical design of the two buildings came about. Further, they were designed by a local architect named Charles Netchell, and they had a number of other notable owners, including Edith McIntosh and Ebert Siegmiller. There we go. In terms of their contextual value, the two buildings contribute to the continuity and the character of the streetscape, and they're historically linked to their surroundings, as well as having a historical relationship to one another. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Are there any delegations here? I don't believe so. All right. Any questions for staff? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So were there not some major renovations done to these buildings recently by One Roof? Like, where do they fit into this designation?
So through you, Madam Chair, the work that was done on site was the construction of a building behind the heritage attributes, or the two heritage buildings.
Okay, so these two buildings themselves were not touched?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Any other questions for staff? Okay. I would need somebody to move this recommendation that pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to designate the front facade of the property municipally addressed as 9092 Queen Street. I am so sorry. Jumping. All right. That pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to designate the property municipally addressed as 35 and 43 Sheldon Avenue North as being of cultural heritage value or interest as outlined in Development Services Department Report, DSD 2023-362. So who would like to move this motion?
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yes, Councillor.
I have a question of staff, my apologies. To designate this as heritage, does this, because One Roof owns it, does it limit them to make any changes, or is it going to impair their ability to care for the building properly, or like, is it going to incur more cost to them or more burden to them, I guess is what I want to ask.
Through you, Madam Chair, it would actually make them eligible for our Heritage Grant Program.
Perfect.
Which, is used to upkeep and maintain properties.
Excellent, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw, any other questions before we call the question?
Sorry, Madam Chair, just to clarify, so One Roof, we were in discussions about designated through the site plan review process. With review of the development applications, they were aware that once the construction was completed on site, that we would be moving forward with designation, and we do have their consent recently, and they're happy to see it designated, and it'll allow for their continued function.
Thank you for the clarification. All right, any other questions, comments? All right, all those in favor of the motion of designation for 35 and 43 Sheldon Avenue North?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I don't believe we had a mover for this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman will move it. You're right. All right, all those in favor? Okay, unanimously. So it will go to council on September 25th. All right, next. The notice of intention to designate 90-92 Queen Street South under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And Jessica Vera, please present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this NOID is now being brought forward to recognize the building for its design, physical, historical, associative, and contextual values. 90-92 Queen Street South is part of an active site plan application, and the development was first introduced to the committee in June 2022 when an HIA was brought forward. Designation of the building is a condition of site plan approval. So the design value of the building relates to it being a representative and unique example of an Art Deco architectural style. It is unique to the area that it is within. That particular style is unique to the area that it is within. And further, the building is in good condition with many intact original elements. Its historical value relates to its use or its historical use as the plural laundry cleaners and dryers. The business was founded by David Nipple in 1897, and it has a long association with dry cleaning companies. Its contextual value relates to it maintaining the commercial and industrial character of the streetscape, and it is visually and historically linked to its surroundings. A heritage permit application will be forthcoming, and the following are renderings of the proposed work, which show the retained facade of 90-92 Queen Street South, as well as the retained facade of the adjacent buildings. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. We do have a delegation here, David Galbraith or Ethan Leibster. And again, may I remind you to lean into the mic when you are speaking.
Good evening. My name is Dave Galbraith. I'm a planner with Up Consulting, and I'm joined tonight by three members of the architectural team from SRM. We're here on behalf of the owner of the property, who are Innate Development, who are proposing the redevelopment of the site. So we have a brief presentation tonight and are available for question and answer following, but we'll walk through some background of the site, the existing conditions of the facade and some of its heritage attributes, an overview of the development proposal itself, the heritage designation request, and then some next steps. So in terms of some background here, a site plan application was advanced for this property last year, and as you'd heard, the Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment was brought to the Heritage Committee in June of 2022. So the site plan application calls for a 45-story mixed-use development with ground floor publicly accessible amenity and retail uses, and it obtained approval in principle in spring of 2022. The consulting team's currently working through conditions of approval in principle for the site plan application, which included several heritage-related elements, including the Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment, Conservation Plan, Structural Assessments, Demolition Plans, and Stabilization Plans. And at this point, the applicant is pursuing a heritage designation for the facade of 9292 Queen Street, which is the historic Pearl Laundry building. And then deconstruction and reconstruction of the remaining Queen Street facade is also proposed to be incorporated into the development as possible. So I'll hand it over to Jeff from SRM to speak to some of the existing conditions here.
Good evening. The building the building on Queen Street that we're 9092 is an Art Deco building, and we're trying to maintain it as such and reincorporate, reanimate, and adaptively reuse the facade into our development. Much of the building is intact. There is some damage, but for the most part, it's in really good condition, and we want to ensure that it stays in that condition for as long as possible. As was mentioned in the HIA, it is unique in the area. There's not a lot of Art Deco buildings downtown, and we think it's important to maintain that artistic or architectural style. We are activating the street and the facade with public amenity behind the building, and we're also, the second floor will have residential units in it. We're taking from the existing facade some architectural characteristics that will be used throughout the tower and into the interior of the building. So there'll be architectural Art Deco arches within the public and semi-private areas in the building, as well as the tower itself is picking up some of those last century design cues. Thank you.
Are you able to advance the slide? Yeah. So this slide here does show the site plan for the proposed development with the tower location shown in the dark gray, and then the location of the heritage facade to be designated in the red box. And then an image on the right shows the Queen Street elevation of the tower. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides show how this building will be maintained in the podium of the development. A couple of comments that did come up at the Heritage Committee meeting last year were really trying to differentiate the base of the building from the tower above, and some changes that have occurred since then are really lifting the podium and recessing it a bit further than was originally proposed so that the Queen Street facade continues to stand out here. And you can see that a driveway is proposed off of Queen Street to lead to the parking both above and below grade. But some of the design elements of the other buildings, which are also characteristic of Queen Street, are proposed to be reintroduced into this development. Next slide, please. And so this image here, again, it's pretty clear on the renderings what's being retained, but that's the heritage facade of the Pearl Laundry. So in terms of the findings of the Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment, as you would have heard last year, and you may remember, it did meet 5 of the 9 criteria for designation. And because of that and the requirements of the site plan approval, an application to designate it was submitted earlier this year in June. Once designated, a heritage permit application will be advanced to allow for the demolition of the remainder of the building, which the heritage study has found does not have any heritage characteristics and has been heavily modified over time. So at this point, if you have any questions for me or my team, I'm happy to respond.
Thank you. for your presentation. And now we go to committee members for questions to the delegation. Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why the facades on the other adjacent buildings aren't being preserved as well. I mean, you're trying to replicate them in some ways. I assume that they were, certainly the one on the right, I don't know the addresses, but I assume it was constructed around the same time as the one that we're designating here. So maybe you can explain that, please.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. So one piece of the puzzle at the podium of the building is right at the intersection, and the region does require a daylight visibility triangle in that instance, so there for safety matters really, and for visibility for cars maneuvering around the turn, that portion of the building was not able to be retained. As I'd mentioned, a driveway is also proposed off of Queen Street, so it's a functional requirement of the development to have this driveway leading into the site. So it did create some functional limitations on what could be retained there. But maybe I'll hand it over to Mark and Jeff just to speak about how the other portions of the facade have been reconsidered here.
Thank you, Dave. My name is Mark Villemer, Managing Partner here at SRM Architects. You just heard earlier from Jeff Atchison. He's an associate at SRM Architects. Maybe an easier way to look at things, I'll boil it down. There's been a couple of properties. I think it appears to be one building, technically two properties that were listed as areas of interest. And so taking a step back, our heritage consultants did an analysis of that and, of course, the surrounding area. And what was found was that there indeed was cultural and heritage value, specifically to the facade. You heard Dave just recently talk about how not the whole building had that value. It was just the facade, that Art Deco facade. The rest of the building behind had been so heavily modified over the years. The building was built and didn't look that way originally. It was renovated to the Art Deco, if you will. And so that's specifically what's been seen as something of value. The rest of the street didn't carry the same value, and so we took the strategy of we want to preserve that one facade and reuse it into the development of the podium, the amenity spaces of that building. Then we had a decision. We were at a crossroads of do we just design something completely new where we keep this one piece as the old heritage part and then we do something brand new all around it, or do we reconstruct the streets to fit back into what it is today? And so that's been the strategy, that you have this one piece that's been maintained, and that's what you talk about, the stabilization studies and everything, because it's being kept there during construction. It's not being removed, it's not being demolished and then rebuilt. It's there and it's saved. Then the rest of the site would be demolished over time, excavated, a full new development. This is a 45-story apartment building. It's a large development here with multiple levels of underground parking and integrated levels of above-ground parking behind the amenity and in some aspects behind residential units. So in terms of why everything wasn't just kept the way it was and built a new building on top, it wasn't necessarily, I think, economically feasible to keep everything the way it was. But fortunately, with the help of our consultants, we're able to say, well, this here has value, so let's use this as a central tenet of the development and work around that.
And do you have any pictures of the interior of any of these buildings?
Certainly, yes. So the current property owner is the developer, and so we have access inside, and we've at length documented that, and we'd be happy to provide that information if it hasn't already been prepared as part of the HIA.
It's in the HIA.
It is in the HIA, thank you. So through Madam Chair. So it is provided with the HIA, but we probably have a lot more material. The way it was described to me and from what I saw, I had never been in physically myself. Part of the issues actually at that site is keeping it boarded up to keep people out is a bit of a problem right now in terms of a property management issue, but it's there's nothing remarkable about the interiors right now, certainly from a cultural heritage perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Natalie?
So what is the current use of the buildings right now? I saw in the pictures it looked like it was commercial and perhaps possibly residential on the top levels.
I believe currently it's entirely retail or commercial.
Okay, so there's no residents right now in any of the buildings?
I don't
that would be
believe so.
displaced? Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, there may have been. At this point, I believe they've vacated all the tenants from the space. If anyone's been around there, certainly if you walk around back, it's a different flavor right now. Right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, then we'll go to the recommendation in the staff report that pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to designate the front facade of the property municipally addressed as 9092 Queen Street South as being of cultural heritage value or interest, as outlined in Development Service Department DSD 2023-358. And who would like to move this? Thank you, Donnie. All those in favor? Councillor Chapman? Unanimous, carried. So it will go to council on September 25th. Thank you. All right, information items, heritage permit application tracking sheet. Staff, do you have any comments about that? Jessica?
Through you, Madam Chair, not about the heritage permit application tracking sheet specifically, but we were going to bring forward an update to the committee regarding our designation work today. I have a slide prepared for that too.
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing. Did you say you'd like to bring forth something more, or?
Yes, I was just noted that we are bringing forward an update regarding our designation work that's been completed this year.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in this year, 2023, 8 notices of intention to designate have been brought before our committee, and we are anticipating bringing forward a minimum of 4 to 5 more in October and November's meeting. Approximately 52 field reviews have been completed between staff and our Heritage Kitchener committee members. 12 detailed archival reviews have also been completed, and 12 homeowners have been contacted to notify them that we're wishing to pursue designation for their property.
Any questions for staff? Seeing that you have contacted 12 homeowners, are you waiting for replies?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be the ideal process, but we have not yet received any response to the letters that we've sent out.
Are there any questions further on the potential for designation?
Just a question about when were the letters sent? Like, would you have expected to have received a response by now, or?
They were sent a couple weeks ago, so we would be anticipating responses by this point in time. We would like to give the homeowners longer to respond before we bring forward the notices of intention to designate, but ideally we would like to be bringing them forward before the end of this year, in which case if we haven't received responses from that point, there is still the appeal period after a notice of intention to designate has been brought forward, which would give homeowners even more time to respond if they wish.
And do we have a list of what those properties are?
We do have a list which we can share to committee members if interested.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful. And as far as, I know I'm not part of any of the groups right now looking at different properties, but when are those due and when do we get our next group of properties? Oh, 4 or 5 more in October?
Sorry, what was that last part?
Well, I mean, we were given the task of looking at different properties and filling out those forms, so I was just wondering if you've got everything back, or when more are coming to us to look at?
Yep, we have received a number of them back. As noted, we have 52 completed. We were going to pause on actually completing the field reviews, especially as the weather turns now, while we work through our detailed archival review. So we're not anticipating requesting any more field reviews until probably next year.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, Natalie?
Just had a question about contacting. So are we, are only homeowners being contacted for designation, or other properties that are not, just specifically homeowners being reached out to as well?
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean tenants of the property, or?
No, I mean, are we only reaching out to homes, residential areas, or are we also reaching out to people that own a property that may be commercial?
Sorry, any property owners that we're wishing to designate are being contacted.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other items for the agenda, comments, directions for next time? With that, thank you very much, and I will call the meeting adjourned.